In 1241, a European kingdom vanished from the map in a matter of weeks. The cause wasn't plague or civil war. It was the formidable power of the Mongol Empire, then the world's mightiest military force. One-third of Hungary's population perished. Thousands of villages were reduced to ashes. The king was forced to flee from one city to another like a pauper. A German monk recorded, "After 350 years of existence, the Hungarian kingdom was obliterated." However, 44 years later, when the Mongols returned with the same strategies, the same might, and the same intent to conquer, they suffered a resounding defeat. They failed to capture a single fortified city, lost thousands of warriors, and retreated in disgrace. What happened during those 44 years? What secret weapon transformed a devastated kingdom into an impenetrable fortress? Before I reveal it, please share in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely interested in our global audience. And here's a question to ponder. Was this secret weapon a miraculous invention, or something far more profound concerning resilience and transformation? To grasp the secret weapon, one must first comprehend the sheer scale of the catastrophe. In March 1241, 5 Mongol armies simultaneously invaded Hungary from 5 distinct directions. This wasn't a sudden assault. It was a meticulously orchestrated campaign devised by Subutai, arguably the greatest military genius in the history of the Mongol Empire. Subutai dispatched spies into Poland, Austria, and deep into Hungary. He knew the terrain, their weaknesses, and, crucially, that Hungary was deeply divided internally. King Bela IV, an intelligent and courageous man, had attempted to consolidate royal power by reclaiming lands his father had granted to the nobility. This sparked profound resentment. Some Hungarian aristocrats secretly hoped the Mongols would defeat the king, believing the disaster would only affect a few, not everyone. They were tragically mistaken. Yet, there was an even greater vulnerability than political disunity: Hungary's defensive infrastructure. In 1241, the entire Hungarian kingdom, an area comparable to modern-day Poland, possessed fewer than 10 stone castles. 10. And most of these were situated on the western border with Austria, not in the east where the Mongols attacked. Why was this the case? Not because Hungary was poor or undeveloped, but due to a deliberate state policy. For centuries, Hungarian kings had forbidden nobles from constructing private stone castles. The reason? They feared that if lords had their own strongholds, they would become independent of royal authority, leading to feudalism and civil war. This policy preserved the king's centralized power in peacetime, but in a war against the Mongols, it proved to be a death sentence. Most Hungarian towns and villages were protected by wooden forts, earthworks, and moats. While these fortifications might have withstood Western armies, they were no match for the Mongols. The Mongol army brought siege engines capable of launching stones weighing tens of kilograms, employed incendiary materials, and utilized brutal tactics. They forced captives to fill moats with earth and bodies, creating pathways for their advancing troops. A German chronicler wrote, "The Hungarians had almost no towns protected by strong walls or fortresses." Regarding the army, Hungary fielded between 60,000 and 100,000 warriors. This sounds impressive, but most were light cavalry, similar to their Hunnic ancestors. They lacked heavily armored knights and had very few crossbowmen. They were unfamiliar with the tactics of these steppe enemies. The Mongols, conversely, had about 80,000 warriors, each a professional fighter trained from childhood. They possessed composite bows capable of shooting 300 meters, employed feigned retreats to lure enemies into ambushes and encirclements, and had Subutai. On April 11, 1241, the two armies clashed near the Sajo River, close to the village of Mohi. On the night of April 10th, the Hungarian army camped along the Sajo River, believing they had secured a strategic position. By holding the 200-meter bridge across the river, they thought they could halt the Mongols. At midnight, the Mongol vanguard attempted to cross the bridge. Prince Koloman and Archbishop Ugrin, alongside the Knights Templar, immediately counterattacked and achieved a victory. The Hungarian crossbowmen, though few in number, inflicted immense damage on the narrow bridge. Chronicler Thomas of Split noted, "The Mongol vanguard was massacred almost to the last man. The Hungarians rushed upon them and cut down many, pushing the rest back across the bridge, where they drowned in the river." The Hungarian forces returned to camp, celebrating their triumph. They assumed the war was over. They did not know that Subutai had been observing from afar and had just learned a crucial lesson. Hungarian crossbows were dangerous, and the narrow bridge was a Mongol weakness. Therefore, Subutai revised his strategy. While Batu persistently assailed the bridge with 7 stone-hurling devices to keep the Hungarians occupied, Subutai discreetly maneuvered substantial forces south, hastily constructing a river crossing. Simultaneously, Batu's brother Shiban led detachments north, seeking a ford to traverse the river. At dawn on April 11th, the Hungarians abruptly realized they were encircled on 3 sides. They attempted a counterattack, but it was too late. The Mongols employed gunpowder weaponry, a novel technology introduced from China, to sow panic among the Hungarian troops. Horses became frenzied, and soldiers trampled each other. One Hungarian nobleman recounted, "More men died from the crush than from being shot." Then, Subutai made his ultimate tactical move. He deliberately left a gap in the encirclement. Perceiving an opportunity for escape, the Hungarians surged through this opening. However, it was a trap. As soon as they abandoned the camp and dispersed across the open terrain, the Mongol horse archers began to pursue them in small groups, like prey. Once again, Hungarian crossbowmen displayed bravery. Chronicles attest that they inflicted significant casualties on the Mongols. Batu even almost gave the order to retreat due to heavy losses, but Subutai persuaded him to press on. Consequently, 60,000 Hungarians perished. King Bela IV survived, thanks to the desperate efforts of his bodyguards, and managed to flee. Nobles, peasants, and bishops all died together. Over the subsequent year, the Mongols ravaged Hungary, obliterating between 50% and 80% of villages on the plains and enslaving the populace. They wrecked irrigation systems, leading to famine in 1242 to 1243. Hungary ceased to exist as a functional state. In March 1242, rather strangely, the Mongols withdrew. The official explanation cited the death of the great Khan Ogedei in December 1241 and the necessity for princes to return to Mongolia for the election of a new Khan. However, modern historians have uncovered inconsistencies. News of the death could not have reached Batu quickly enough. Moreover, Batu refused to return to Mongolia for the election. So, what was the real reason? Some evidence suggests that the Mongol forces were far more exhausted than generally acknowledged. Despite their victories, they continued to encounter persistent pockets of resistance. The city of Esztergom, then the capital of Hungary, featured a small stone citadel at its core. Batu bombarded it with siege engines, but the walls did not collapse. He dispatched troops to storm it, but the crossbowmen in the fortress, commanded by the Aragonese knight Simon, repelled wave after wave of assaults. The chronicler Rogerius noted the terrifying effectiveness of the crossbowmen in inflicting heavy losses on the Mongols. Similarly, the stone fortresses of Székesfehérvár, Pannonhalma, and Klis also held steadfast. At Klis, defenders even hurled boulders down from the hill onto Mongol soldiers climbing upward after an unsuccessful attempt to use siege equipment. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed even more astonishing details. Hungarian peasants dug defensive ditches around stone churches on hills and fought from there. Hundreds of weapons and skeletal remains bearing combat injuries have been unearthed. Ordinary people offered widespread resistance, slowing the Mongol advance. One contemporary historian observed that the collective Hungarian resistance was significantly more substantial than reported in Western and Eastern sources. Perhaps Batu retreated not only due to political motives, but also because he realized that Hungary could be devastated but not entirely subjugated at the current cost. In May 1242, King Bela IV returned to a ravaged country. This marked a turning point in history. A weak monarch would likely have succumbed to despair. An ordinary ruler might have focused solely on restoring what was lost. But Bela acted differently. He surveyed the ashes and posed a different question. Why did some places endure? The answer was evident: stone castles, crossbowmen, heavy armor. Based on this, he made the boldest decision of his life, a decision that went against centuries of Hungarian traditions. In 1247, Bela IV wrote to Pope Innocent IV, outlining his plan to fortify the Danube, a river of battles, with stone fortresses. But this was merely the beginning. Bela did something unprecedented. He abolished the royal monopoly on castle construction. He permitted nobles, bishops, and even cities to erect their own fortresses with one condition. They had to be prepared to fight for the king if necessary. This was an immense political gamble. It is worth recalling that the former policy, which forbade castle construction, aimed to prevent the nobility from consolidating power. Now Bela was altering this policy. Why? Because he understood a fundamental truth. It was better to have a strong kingdom with powerful nobles than to be a weak king ruling over ashes. He believed the Mongol threat was so great it would unite Hungary, and he was right.
The outcomes were astonishing. During the initial decade, 44 new stone fortresses were erected. By the conclusion of Bela IV's reign, this number had expanded to nearly 100. Contemporary research indicates that between 1242 and 1300, a total of 147 to 172 new strongholds were constructed. The Hungarian kingdom, which previously possessed merely 10 stone castles, transformed into a formidable power, boasting hundreds of defensive installations. However, Bela's efforts extended beyond simply building fortifications. He implemented a complete overhaul of the entire military infrastructure. In 1248, he issued a decree enabling middle-class individuals to serve the nobility and receive land grants, provided they fought in the royal army outfitted in armor. This mandate was groundbreaking. Instead of light cavalry, Hungary now required heavily armored knights, modeled after Western styles.
In 1924-70, Bela forged an agreement with the Knights Hospitaller, granting them southeastern border territories in exchange for training armored cavalry and constructing fortifications. Crucially, in 1259, Bela petitioned the Pope for assistance in establishing contact with Venice to recruit at least 1,000 professional crossbowmen. Why were crossbowmen considered so vital? Crossbows offered 3 significant advantages against the Mongols. Firstly, their range surpassed that of Mongol composite bows. This was particularly true for heavy European crossbows, capable of hitting targets between 350 and 400 meters away. Secondly, they provided superior armor penetration. A crossbow bolt could pierce Mongol leather and wooden armor from a considerable distance. Thirdly, training crossbowmen did not demand years of practice, unlike archers. A peasant could master basic crossbow skills in a few weeks, which was essential for rapid army mobilization. Yet the primary benefit of crossbows was realized not on open battlefields, but in castle defense. Bela understood that Hungary could not defeat the Mongols in mobile warfare on the plains. However, from behind thick stone walls, through specially designed narrow arrow slits, crossbowmen could unleash volleys while remaining fully protected. The Mongols, whose strength lay in mobile mounted archers, were rendered ineffective against such a defensive system. Bela also reformed urban areas. In 1248, he relocated the population of Pest from the plain to a hill across the Danube, where the new fortified city of Buda was built. Within 20 years, Buda became Hungary's most important commercial hub. Bela granted self-governance to over 20 cities, encouraging them to construct stone walls and organize their own defenses. But perhaps the most impactful reform was not military, but psychological.
Bela permitted thousands of immigrants from Germany, Poland, and Italy to settle in Hungary to repopulate the ravaged lands. He promised them conditional nobility, a new social status, if they would fight mounted and in armor when the king needed them. This represented a new social contract. The state provided land, protection, and status, while the people offered loyalty and military service. All these efforts were directed towards a single common goal: to prevent a repeat of the 1241 catastrophe. Bela was known as the second founder of Hungary, not because he created a nation from scratch, but because he revitalized it from the ashes, breathing new life into it. However, would all these transformations prove successful? The answer arrived in the winter of 1285. Throughout the 1250s and 1260s, The Golden Horde Khans consistently issued ultimatums to Hungary. In 1254, Batu Khan demanded a marital alliance and a quarter of the Hungarian army for a campaign to conquer Europe. Bela refused. In 1259, Berk Khan reiterated these demands: capitulation, provision of troops, a share of plunder, and tax exemption. Bela once again declined. Another ultimatum arrived in 1264. Bela remained resolute. In correspondence with the Pope, he noted that the Mongols had for decades proven themselves unreliable partners, and any agreement with them was worthless. He knew they would return. The question was not if, but when. In December 1285, the answer came. Nogai and Tulabuga, two powerful generals of the Golden Horde, led an invasion of Hungary. They followed the same route as in 1241. Tulabuga through the Vereka Pass from the north, Nogai through Transylvania from the south. They anticipated an easy victory, recalling the weakened Hungary of 1241. They believed that 44 years were insufficient to alter the fundamental nature of a people.
They were profoundly mistaken. Tulabuga's forces advanced into northern Hungary, employing old tactics, speed, surprise, and dividing the enemy. But this time they encountered something unprecedented: stone castles everywhere, on every strategic hill, at every important river crossing, at every trade route junction. Tulabuga attempted to attack Rijek Castle in the Zemplin region but failed. He began a siege, but during it, his troops were relentlessly targeted by crossbowmen from the ramparts. The narrow loopholes were ingeniously designed, enabling the crossbowmen to fire outwards while remaining largely impervious to harm. He attempted to deploy siege engines, but unlike the timber and earth fortifications of 1241, these substantial stone walls proved impenetrable. Chroniclers noted that Tulabuga faced immense obstacles due to the fortified density and ultimately failed to conquer any castles or fortified towns. Meanwhile, Nogai, who was in Transylvania, initially had more success. He laid waste to the cities of Arian, Brasov, and Bistritz, which had yet to be fully fortified. But then he, too, encountered the defense system of castles. At Traska Fortress, the Sechen defenders repelled several consecutive assaults. The situation now markedly diverged from 1241. This time, the Hungarians were not confined to passive defense. They actively engaged Mongol detachments under the command of Roland Borshi, Amadeo Aba, Georgi Baki, and Peter Soros. All these officers, having received training and promotions following the reforms, consistently ambushed and harassed the Mongol forces. These were not the lightly armed horsemen seen in 1241, but heavily armored knights, equipped similarly to their Western European counterparts, fighting from secure castle strongholds. Hungary's strategy now involved utilizing castles as strongholds, deploying crossbowmen for long-range damage infliction, and using heavily armored knights for counterattacks when the Mongols were depleted. For the Mongols, whose primary advantage lay in mobile warfare across open plains, this was a nightmare. They couldn't draw the enemy into open battle. They couldn't capture the castles. Each day, they lost more soldiers to ambushes, disease, and dwindling supplies. Eventually, King Laszlo I assembled a principal army on the Danube's west bank, a potent, well-equipped, and confident force. Tulabuga, upon witnessing this, resolved to retreat. However, the withdrawal through the Carpathian Mountains in winter, in the face of a hostile local populace, turned into a catastrophe. The Zechen ambushed Tulabuga's troops during their retreat. Heavy snowfall blocked their path. The army disintegrated. Nogai's forces in the south also incurred heavy losses. According to chronicles, he managed to acquire some plunder, but lost thousands of warriors. Within 2 months, the Mongols had entirely vacated Hungary. They failed to capture a single fortified city. The king eluded them. They returned with meager spoils and horrifying casualties. As one historian penned, the outcome could not have differed so starkly from the 1241 invasion. In 1241, Hungary was devastated in a matter of weeks. In 1285, the Mongols were repelled in a few months. What shifted the situation? Now, let's revisit the initial query. What was Hungary's secret weapon? If you anticipate a miraculous invention,
some innovative weaponry, or a superior tactic unknown to others, you'll be disappointed. Because the secret weapon wasn't a singular item. It was a comprehensive system. Component 1. The stone castles, erected over periods ranging from 10 to almost 140 years. These encompassed not just grand fortresses, but also smaller stone towers on hills, city walls, and fortified monasteries. A dense defensive network that prevented invaders from free movement. Every castle proclaimed, "You can ravage villages, but you cannot seize this land." Component 2. The crossbowmen.
Not because crossbows outmatched Mongol bows in all scenarios, but because in the context of castle defense, crossbows allowed users, even civilians with basic training, to inflict effective damage from behind sturdy walls. In 1241, Hungary possessed only a handful of crossbowmen. By 1285, most border castles had professional crossbowmen. Component 3. Heavily armored knights. Their purpose was not to defeat Mongol horse archers on open plains. That remained a challenge. They served as a counterattacking force when Mongols were drawn into close combat, or when they were besieging castles and becoming exhausted. In 1241, only the Knights Templar and a few foreign knights wore full armor. By 1285, Hungary boasted thousands of such knights, trained and funded by the new feudal system established by Bela. Component 4, and the most crucial, strategy. Bela recognized that Hungary could not vanquish the Mongols in a war of attrition on the plains, so he didn't attempt to.
Instead, he devised a multi-layered defensive strategy. The first layer, castles and fortified cities to impede the enemy and inflict casualties. The second layer, crossbowmen from the walls to weaken advancing forces. The third layer, armored knights to counterattack from protected bases. The fourth layer, the local populace to ambush and harass the enemy during their retreat. This constituted an active defensive strategy. Instead of merely impeding the invaders, the resistance efforts aimed to make the incursion insurmountably costly to proceed. In 1241, the Mongols laid waste to Hungary at an acceptable price. By 1285, the expenditure became unbearable. However, there was a final, less tangible, yet arguably most crucial factor: collective resolve. King Bela IV transformed the catastrophic events of 1241 into a defining national memory, serving as a wellspring of motivation. Every Hungarian understood an inevitable Mongol return. Each stronghold built, every knight trained, each arbalester enlisted had one overriding objective: to prevent a recurrence of 1241. This explains why the nobility, fragmented in 1241, unified in 1285. This is why the common folk, who fled in 1241, fought resolutely from castles in 1285. The Mongols were not vanquished by weaponry alone. They were overcome by a societal metamorphosis. Hungary's narrative is not simply ancient history. It offers profound insights for anyone, whether an individual or an organization, confronting setbacks and needing to rebuild. The first lesson: adversity can be illuminating. Many individuals, post-failure, resort to blame, excuses, or denial. Bela, conversely, approached it differently. He dissected failures with the precision of a scientist. Why did certain locales endure? How did arbalesters prove more effective than light cavalry? What prevented the Mongols from seizing Estragon? He extracted insights from the disaster, converting them into strategic action. In life, when grappling with setbacks, be it in careers, business, or relationships, the pertinent question isn't, "Why am I so unfortunate?" but, "What valuable lesson does this setback impart?" The second lesson: systemic transformation mandates political fortitude. Bela's most courageous decision wasn't constructing fortifications, but relinquishing absolute power, sharing it with the magnates. This defied every monarch's instinct and engendered risks. Yet, Bela recognized that in the new circumstances, under the Mongol threat, clinging to the old monarchical model would lead to ruin. It was preferable to share authority within a robust state than to exclusively command over ruins. Many contemporary leaders falter by attempting to preserve antiquated models in an evolving world, fearing change more than defeat. The third lesson: defense does not equate to passivity. Hungary in 1285 didn't simply seal itself off and wait. They erected defensive structures while simultaneously launching aggressive counterattacks. In life, active defense involves safeguarding existing health, relationships, and finances, while simultaneously seeking opportunities for a counterstrike at the opportune moment. The fourth lesson: time is your ally if you know how to wield it. 44 years, from 1241 to 1285, is a relatively brief span in history, yet Bela systematically utilized every single one. The initial years were dedicated to erecting essential castles, followed by military reform. In subsequent years, he recruited arbalesters and relentlessly trained knights without respite. Many abandon ambitious goals, believing 40 years is too lengthy. But 40 years will pass regardless. The question is, how many fortresses you will have built by then? The fifth lesson: preparing for the worst fortifies the spirit. Bela harbored no illusions that the Mongols wouldn't return. He knew they would. He communicated to his people that all construction was based on a worst-case scenario. When the Mongols indeed arrived, no one panicked. They were ready. In life, blind optimism is perilous. Realistic optimism, hoping for the best while preparing for the worst, cultivates resilience. The sixth lesson: the greatest legacy is a system, not individual accomplishments. Bela passed away in 1270, 15 years before the second invasion. He never witnessed his secret weapon put to the test, but the system he established continued to operate. Castles stood, knights continued training according to his methods, and the defensive strategy was inherited. He forged a system that transcended him and outlived him. This is the mark of exceptional leadership. What matters is not merely what one achieves in life, but what endures and continues to function after one's departure. Thus, we have journeyed from the ashes of 1241 to the triumph of 1285.
The initial query was whether Hungary's secret weapon was a miraculous invention or something more profound. The answer is now evident. It was a systematic societal transformation across infrastructure, the military, politics, and, most crucially, mindset. Stone castles, arbalesters, and armored knights were merely tangible manifestations of this fundamental resolution. Hungary would never again be easily conquered. In 1241, they succumbed due to unpreparedness, internal divisions, and adherence to an antiquated system. In 1285, they triumphed because they absorbed lessons, unified, and adapted. The Mongol Empire, the most formidable of its era, was not halted by a miracle. It was halted by the unwavering persistence of a people who transmuted pain into lessons, lessons into action, and action into a system. Following their defeat in 1285, the Golden Horde never again attacked Hungary, not because they had weakened, but because the cost had become prohibitive.
Hungary transformed from an accessible target into one that was prohibitively costly. This serves as a vital lesson for individuals and entities alike. Invincibility isn't a prerequisite. The key is to render any potential defeat too expensive for the aggressor. Construct your defenses, train your forces, and establish your structures. When challenges inevitably arise, you won't merely endure, you will triumph. If this narrative on resilience offered you a fresh perspective, consider liking and subscribing. My historical content aims not just to recount the past, but to illuminate contemporary relevance. Share in the comments what metaphorical castles you are building in your life, and which systems you're implementing to prepare for future trials. In my upcoming video, I'll explore another leader who turned adversity into victory through an entirely different approach. Make sure you don't miss it. Thank you for watching until the end.